welcome to the latest episode of the Middle-earth Play-by-Mail fan channel. What I'm wanting to talk about today is a real deep dive into the nature of capitals. In particular, the city or major town of which acts as the administrative hub for your nation. And it's really important strategically, both within the rules and in some of the subtle strategies that play out as a result. Now, the first thing to note is that a capital is required in order for your nation to continue functioning. And one of the ways in which a nation can be knocked out is if all possible capital cities are destroyed. Now, a possible capital city is either a major town or a city. Anything lower than that, town, village or camp, cannot act as your capital. So if you're down to just one settlement which can act as either as your capital and you lose it, you're out of the game. Now, the first thing to note is that there are three nations in 1650, the main format of the game, which begin with just one possible capital, that is Arthedain, the Dunlendings and the Ice King. Now, for Arthedain and the Ice King, their capitals do come with castles on top, and their locations aren't the most accessible, so they're relatively protected, but it's well advised that they do try and build up a backup capital relatively quickly. For the Dunlendings, however, they have one major town, it's only defended by a tower, so a very heavily aggressive move against the Duns' capital early on can be difficult. So the Duns have to think through that particular aspect of their nation. One thing to note is that if during a turn you lose your only viable capital, but by the end of the turn you can have a capital transferred to you, then you will remain in the game, because the point within the turn order where the program checks to see if you don't have a viable capital is right at the very end of the turn. And the transfer of population centres happens at order number 949, I believe. And so you can have lost all major towns and cities, but if a friendly nation moves to one of their major towns and you move one of your emissaries in and their emissary order goes through, that major town will be transferred to you. It becomes your new capital and you'll still be in the game. Another thing to note about the vulnerability of capitals is that capitals, while they won't reduce in size due to low loyalty, so they won't go from a major town down to a town, they can be flipped by emissaries using influence other orders. This can happen particularly in the late game if you have large groups of emissary companies moving around. In one game as the Quiet Avenger, I managed to flip Minas Tirith in one turn. Just took it, even though it was a city with a capital. That was a very powerful emissary group. They all got their influence other orders off, and Minas Tirith suddenly was batting for the dark side. One defense against this is to make sure you have an army at your capital, even if it's only a seed army of 100 or a few hundred troops, because that means influence other cannot be used against that population centre. The other reason that capitals are so important is because there are some orders, capital orders, that can only be given from that place, and some of them are really quite critical. First of all, you can only change your tax rate with a change tax rate order at your capital. Second thing is that nation relations, whether you're friendly or you hate your opponents, and all of the effects that has on the mechanics in so many different aspects of the game, that also can only happen at your capital. Those two orders, change tax rate and change nation relations, they have to be done by a fairly competent commander, usually around rank 40 is a good place to aim with those. You can also only name new characters at your capital. So planning ahead and making sure you have characters in your capital at key points where you will need to name more characters is really important. The other actions that happen, which any character can do, but they do have to be your character, is 325, your nation selling to caravans order, which is one of the main ways you can actually raise money other than taxation. And otherwise, some of the orders about just managing production and moving goods around. So nation transport at 947, that means you can move all of your goods, or a percentage of your goods, up to 100% from across the whole of your nation to one of your specified population centres. This is particularly useful if you're wanting to have one population centre have all the relevant materials for equipping armies, building war machines and the rest. And also 948, the transport by caravans order, to move something from one of your population centres to anywhere else, you need to have either a character in that population centre or somebody within your capital. So you can do issue 947 to move all of your goods to some random camp of yours, and then straight after that 948, which will follow after in turn order, to move those goods from that random camp to wherever you want. Say you're wanting to pass resources on to an ally to help them. When you consider the importance of being able to sell things, naming new characters, getting your tax rate right, getting the nation relations with your allies and your enemies right, and being able to move goods all around, they're so critical. It's obvious that you have to always, throughout the game, have the right number of characters at your capital. What exactly is the right number of characters is a moot point, and it will vary from circumstance to circumstance, but normally 3 or 4 is a good one to aim at, including a couple of commanders. This might be a touch more, perhaps, if you've got a nation which is a little bit away from the front line and you're quite economically strong and you have quite a role in moving goods around and supporting the rest of the team economically. It might be a little bit less if you're a little bit nearer the front line and you're having to have a lot of people out running armies or out as agents or whatever. Obviously, the more characters you have in your capital, the fewer you have out in the field doing the things they need to do, which is hurt the enemy. So around 3 or 4 in the early game is quite good. Try and factor in as early as you can a change to tax rate. You can do that in other ways. I will do a video looking at economics and taxes at some point, so I won't go into the details there. But if you can change your tax rate very early on, there are good reasons for doing that. But still, just every turn having a couple of spare orders to be able to move goods around or to sell goods, particularly if something goes up in price and suddenly you're sitting on some really valuable goods. That is essential. You don't want to suddenly find you've only got one character at your capital and you miss the opportunity of selling to market because they're busy doing other things. It's also good, particularly, to have a few commanders there, at least one of them running an army, because your capital will be one of the best places for heavy recruiting, particularly if you've got a nation where your capital is relatively close to the enemy, and most of them are. So each turn you'll have one of your orders, one of your command orders, probably given over to recruiting, which means other command orders for changing nation relations, or maybe doing a name character order so you can name a multi-classed character, or naming a new commander, will have to be secondary to that. So at least 2 commanders is a good thing. Now obviously, because capitals their locations are known in advance, and because they're likely to have several characters there, and also because your treasury is based there, they're also very good locations for agents to target, particularly when agents start to really build up their strength. You're going to find characters there, so a good tactic once you've got some good strong agent companies is to move in to someone's capital. You can find 3 or 4 characters to kill. You kill those characters. They're then not in place to do any sales orders the next turn, so that has economic effects knocking on. The character who's been targeted has to move other characters back in order to name new characters to replace those that have been lost. If the agents are still camped out there, they can kill any new characters moving in. It can be a real headache by getting a bulk of good agents going on someone's capital and just having a few turns just really setting them back by killing off a lot of their good characters. Any successful steel gold orders which happen at a capital will yield extra gold because that's where the nation's treasury is. So if your agent is targeting someone who's got quite a lot of gold in their treasury, you can get quite a lot of cash out of them if you manage to pull off that particular heist. It is a little bit harder for agent skills to work at an enemy's capital. They can also likely to have fortifications there, which can make agent skills a little bit harder to use, so do be aware of that. So one thing to note, if agents are a bit of a problem, particularly if you're on the Free People side, don't do everything at your capital. For example, if you've got a mage, say with a palantir, or who's just wanting to slowly build up their mage skills through apprentice magery and learning some spells, you can move them out of your capital to a newly built camp that no one knows where it is, and they will be a lot safer there, much less likely to be targeted by an agent dropping around for a cup of tea and a quick shiv through the ribs. If you're thinking of transferring artifacts between characters, if the enemy knows that one nation has got it, they might think, right, they're likely to have that at their capital. Let's pop in there and just check them out. If you're learning up curse skills with a powerful mage, don't just sit in your capital for 3 turns in a row doing that. There's a chance that your enemy might pick that up, turn up and borrow the artifact from you and skedaddle. Another point about capitals, which some people miss, is that if you use a palantir to scry located on the capital, you can also pick up the locations of other potential capitals, as in major towns or cities, owned by that nation. This can be particularly useful if you scry and you find they've gone and found a backup capital elsewhere, or if they've been given a backup capital by someone else in anticipation of their main capital getting trashed at some point. So a palantir scry on a capital can be a very useful way of gathering information. And finally, if you lose a capital, particularly if you lose it in combat, you will lose loyalty of 20% of the loyalty of all the other pop centers you have. So that is a big hit to loyalty across your nation. So look after your capital. When I say 20%, that doesn't mean it will reduce it by 20 points. It will reduce it by 20% of the points they have. So if it's got 50 loyalty, it will drop by 10. You can, of course, relocate your capital. That's something which happens right at the end of the turn. So don't wait until the enemy is at the gates and about to take you, because you'll probably lose your capital before you get the chance to move it. It does cost 25,000 gold as well, so it's quite a bit of cash tied up in that. But it means that you can choose where your capital goes. If your capital is lost due to combat or influence other, I believe I'm right in thinking that the next capital you will have is whichever mage town or city you have with the highest loyalty. Obviously, if you've got a backup capital that's really safe, way out of the back of beyond, but it hasn't got the highest loyalty, a relocate capital order just to make sure your capital is completely safe is the thing to do. Don't forget, if you are relocating your capital, make sure you are moving the administration, a couple of commanders, 1 or 2 other characters. So you've got 3 or 4 characters in there as soon as it's moved, so they can pick up with those essential capital orders as soon as it's happened. Well, I hope that's given you a good rundown of what some of the strategies around capitals are, where they sit within the rules, and why they're so essential in gameplay. Make sure you protect your capital, make sure you have enough characters there, make sure you protect it in the right ways, and have a look at your enemies. See if their capitals are vulnerable in any way. See if you can exploit that, either by destroying it and knocking them out of the game, or by moving in agents or emissaries at a moment when they're not expecting and taking advantage of all the assets you can scoop up whilst you're there. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do take a look at the others we have on the channel. I'm trying to get 1 or 2 out a week at the moment. Not sure what I'll talk about next. If you've got any views, post in the comments below. Apart from that, you take care. Bye now.